So any other questions about anything toolkit related? The official panel, we've got what, 7 minutes now?
Okay, no hand has shot up, so I'd like to jump in and give the medal to the most avid tester of DITA Open Toolkit 3.0, which we released today. And Leif Erikson in the US has already discovered 2 bugs and reported them. So
on the DITA-OT core or a plugin that's built on top of it? Yeah, because I don't care about plugins, I just work on the core. I'm paid to just think about that.
I, at this point, could publicly shame you by saying that one of the bugs is in an external plugin that was developed by some guy.
I blame my cat.
Yeah, okay. But I just wanted to say thank you. There are actually some people out there that download this thing right away and start using it, so that's kind of nice to know. There will be a 301 coming.
I downloaded it this afternoon and started using it, and I also found a bug, although I suspect it's one that's been there for quite a long time.
There are plenty of old bugs there too.
There are also a lot of if Elliott conditions. Some of them have been in there for a long time. Some are new.
I stand for that.
Yeah. Speaking of support, I'll just mention, I'm surprised no one asked it yet, but in terms of support for 2.5, I suspect we'll have at least a patch or 2 for 2.5 coming. I don't know how long that's going to keep going, but at the moment, my tools are still on 2.5, and I will probably be adding fixes, but any fix I make there is going into 3.0, and if it's a hard fix, it's only going to 3.0.
Yeah, so when we released 2.0, for the first release cycle until we released 2.1, we backported all the fixes to the previous stable version. So and that's something that usually you need to pay for. Or those you could get that if you paid for it. Unfortunately, there's no one to give money to do that work.
Yeah, and 1.8.5, the last of the 1.x releases, came out after 2.0. It had a bunch of those fixes in it, but obviously it didn't continue beyond that.
And of course, if someone wants to step up and start supporting and maintaining a sort of a separate fork of 2.x, they're free to do that. We just don't have resources to do that on our own. And of course, remember, if you find bugs in older versions of Open Toolkit, and if you can actually fix those with a pull request, we will most likely merge them. We might not release a new version with that fix, but it will be available if you just build it yourself. And that's what we've been doing for 1.x some versions. We still have those branches in GitHub. This is a quiet panel.
Yes, it is.
Actually, we should be talking.
Magnus trying to get my attention. You were going to remind me of something, and the only thing that I remember is that you said you were going to remind me of something. So please remind me. Yes, okay. So one of the thoughts that we had leading up to the OT Day this year was the notion of trying to put together maybe a little users meetup hackathon, something like that, for people who might be interested in contributing to the documentation. And the idea was to, for those of us who are in town a few days early before the conference, before this thing, so piggybacking onto the piggyback event, which is already up front of DITA Europe, the question was whether there would be interest among people to join in an event like that, where if you've been interested in contributing to the documentation but been a bit intimidated by the whole setup process of, oh my goodness, what do I need to do to clone this repository, and what does pull request mean, and how do I get Jekyll running on my system so that I can test the website output in order to contribute fixes. That's something we considered doing in a little, little event and inviting people to sit around the table and do that and answer some questions and get people up to speed with that. With all of the other things that were going on and the level of interest that we saw initially, we eventually discarded that idea basically because the free venue that we had been offered for that fell through at the last moment. So that is an idea that's out there, and if enough people are interested, that's something we could consider for next year, assuming there's a next year, assuming it's in Berlin. Who knows? But that's an idea.
I had considered, given what I went through getting here for this particular conference, offering my house for next year's event. We can have the meetup in the kitchen. I don't know how I could fit all of you in my living room, but I'll make it happen. So that's also an alternative. Austin, Texas. So, yeah.
You just have to convince Dawn to put the conference in Austin, Texas, and then we're fine.
DITA Europe and
Yes.
Austin, Texas.
Hey, we're looking out of the box here.
Well, I think if any city in the U.S. has a European vibe to it, it would be Austin, right? So you're mentioning like a DITA Open Toolkit documentation centered meetup, but that's making it really like small. And why would you separate a DITA-OT users community from the DITA-OT documentation interested community? Why not make it slightly bigger? If you get DITA Open Toolkit users together, and if you talk about all kinds of chores with the DITA Open Toolkit, etc., there's bound to be some people who might then possibly step up to do some documentation. But if you say, do you want to come to a meetup about DITA-OT documentation? Then a lot of people will say, yeah, well, I don't have anything to contribute.
Yeah, you're right.
So make it bigger.
That making it bigger might help to increase the audience. It could also separate the audience a little bit, and that was our concern, was that there are a number of people in the sort of target audience that we have as users of the toolkit who use the toolkit as writers. They use the toolkit to produce documentation. They're not necessarily comfortable with Java coding, XSLT coding, and things like this, but have indicated at conferences and coffee breaks in the past that, sure, I'd love to help out with docs, but I don't know Git, and that makes me scared. But if you can help me over that hurdle, I'd be happy to contribute some stuff to the docs. So that's where the idea came from, was that it was specifically just people who had said, I don't know enough about software development and coding to contribute to the repository in the form of code, but I would be happy to make documentation contributions if someone could help get me up to speed. So that's where the idea came about, but that's a very valid thought that we could certainly maybe reach a larger group of people if we declared it a set up all the repositories for all the things meetup. I don't know.
And I would happily start, and I'm actually thinking of starting DITA Open Toolkit users meetups in Amsterdam. I mean, there's nothing going on there.
So Young has offered his
once a year.
Young has offered his kitchen for DITA-OT setup meetings, user meetings.
Too small.
Oh.
My living room.
Living room. Sorry, I got that wrong. I mean, there are still around the world a few DITA user groups going. We have one in Austin that meets occasionally. It's sort of slowed down. Magda has one. I've seen tweets about that. It looks a lot more, the venues look a lot more entertaining than those we find for Austin DITA user group.
We've had 2 meetups in Berlin, thanks to the crowd from here as well. So.
And
one in Helsinki.
actually, I had sort of a follow-on to what Young was saying, is that, so I think a sort of a broader hackathon user group meetup might just feels a little bit better for me somehow. That's just my opinion. Because the blocker for me contributing to your project is not the Git and forking and pull request and all that stuff. It's actually just making myself find the time to contribute to a community that has offered me so much professionally. And I think sort of one motivating factor, at least for me and potentially for others, is if we got together as a group and did some useful things and maybe collectively bought some pizza, that would feel less like I'm doing work outside my actual job and more like a community building event that's getting us further down whatever road we go down.
I will say the most successful meetings we had of the Boston DITA user group when I lived in that area all involved pizza.
I don't know if I want to get into this, but since we're probably over time now, but I wouldn't suggest to anyone to make Open Toolkit a hobby and get involved with it outside their day job, because it's not sustainable. So it would be better to do it in a properly professional capacity. Everyone's there to represent the employer, because this isn't the best hobby you can come up with. There are better hobbies, believe me, and better ways of spending your free time. I mean, I get a lot from you, but this isn't the best hobby I know of.
And just on that subject, I am in a place that I know a few among you are in, where it basically, by serving the toolkit, I am serving my job. I don't do this all as a volunteer like Jarno does. Some of the stuff I do is at night, working on random issues from random people that not that any of you are random at this point, but issues that look interesting that don't necessarily serve the clients I'm paid for. Those are the ones I play with in the evening. I don't do that often. It happens. But Jarno's all volunteer. And when we talk about this as a volunteer project, I'd like to make that distinction that a lot of what he does and has done in the past is volunteer. I shouldn't be classed with that. Like, people shouldn't look at me and think about me as representative of that. But
just a declaration or whatever you call it in English. My employer has an open source initiative where if you work on open source, you get compensated for it, 15 euros an hour. You can work on anything you want. I decided to work on Open Toolkit, and it's costing them a lot. Most of my colleagues are working on the Java framework of the week or doing something else. I feel that I should be working on Open Toolkit because I have existing users. I'm making some things better for some people and especially for companies. But I'm not really paid to work on Open Toolkit. I could choose anything I want. Just wanted to know that there is some money involved, but it comes with no strings attached.
the only reason I hand the mic to either one of you is that this particular term is not one I was familiar with until very recently, so you might be able to explain the term better.
Does everyone know the term bus factor of a project? So the bus factor of a project is how many people need to be run over by a bus before the project stalls completely. So our bus factor for the DITA Open Toolkit actual code is 2. If we 2 get run over by a bus, the project will... Yeah, or anything like that, like a bus, a double-decker bus kills the both of us. And I could continue. So that's our bus factor for the actual project. We've shared some of the key access to different repositories and so forth, but hopefully neither one of us gets hit over by a bus. For the docs, it's basically 1. So if Roger goes, then the docs stall all the development for the docs. And I just wanted to highlight that for a project that is future-proof and secure, the bus factor should be as high as possible. So 10 would be good. 10 people, 1 bus, the project's done. With 2 or 1, that's quite low. And I suppose you have the same things in your actual work. How many people from the company need to be run over by a bus until the company becomes, well, there's the manager and then that's it. So everyone knows the bus factor, not just open source. I read an article recently that you can tell people that we need support and we need help, we need your involvement. But if you highlight that our bus factor is really low, that might also help. And you can't stress that enough. Low bus factor, not good.
Yeah, just maybe the idea that think for a moment what it would cost to keep this going if that bus came. So if you work for a vendor, you build a product that's commercial that relies on this project to do what your product does. What happens if it goes away? And how much would that cost of your developer's time to pick that up, figure out how the code works, and keep it going? Compared to giving your developers permission to spend 10 hours a week, or 10 hours a month, or 10 hours a year on company time, submitting some pull requests, an issue here or there, something like that, that actually helps keep the project going while it's still around. So I think that's something, just for those of you who have a commercial interest in the success of DITA and DITA publishing, that's just something to really consider. A little bit of investment now could save you a lot of money later. That's one of the things I think we need most is actually QA. Robert and Jarno know what they're doing when it comes to the coding, but there's just so much testing to be done. Testing on Windows machines is something that we're not real good at right now. So that seems to be something, and I think so many of you vendors out there sell products that run on Windows and Windows only. I bet you've got a bunch of QA engineers in your house that actually test stuff now and then. And I know you pay them to test your stuff, but maybe now and then they could test this stuff too. And it's part of their job. And wouldn't that be cool if they got some money for that?
Or help us set up those test environments that we're asking about.
Right.
Yeah, I just want to highlight that I'm not bringing this forward because of us. You can throw money at us, gather money, give us, say, 10,000 per month, and think that, now Open Toolkit is secure. Most open source projects that have use and have multiple people, they usually have some sort of onboarding process, documentation on how to develop the code. We don't really have that at all. A little bit. Yeah. It's more or less clone the project, read the code, and that's it. I know it's not easy to get into the project, so we're asking you to do something about it, and then we're not making it easier. But again, if you have people who want to join in, the first thing they can document is how to get started in development. I'm serious.
That sounds like a very pessimistic picture, but I mean, to be fair, there have on occasion been people that joined the project in this way and wanted to help us, and their fresh set of eyes was very helpful in getting that set of instructions in place for what do you need to know to join the project, because these people have been on the project for a while. I joined a little bit late. I asked all sorts of questions. I found stuff in the README was really old and I couldn't make anything run, so I updated the README after I figured out how it works. It's a standard way of joining a project, and so you're right, we could be better at that, but with each new person that joins the project, we get better at that. So we need more people to join the project, and then it'll get easier.
We need you to join the project to make it easy to join the project, is what we're saying. Roger did join that way. I mean, he joined after one of these conferences where he heard sessions about it and expressed interest and started going into the docs and then just making changes, and gradually it's like, okay, yes, we're tired of reviewing this. Can we please make you owner of these docs?
And there's a story to that. So Roger was kind enough to come to the airport after one of the DITA-OT days. So we shared a train or something. And at some point where we were at the airport, I told him, you're the owner of the documentation now because you seem keen on doing that. And his face was sort of, oh, okay. So we sort of pushed him into it. But it worked out really nicely. The quality of the docs is a lot better now, and the quality of the project itself is better.
Yeah, I mean, with every new person, and Roger's an excellent example here again, we get a new, fresh set of eyes that see the project differently and try things differently and say, wait, this isn't working as I'd expected. It's like, oh, you're doing something different. Yeah. Are we done? Time for drinks? Oh,
We have a
young
feedback
green
form on tables. We really appreciate getting that feedback, and we share that with Jarno and everyone actually.
And I also,
Yes,
where do we put
that?
that?
That one. Here it will be a good place.
And I also just want to say again, I said this when I was opening, and I'll say it again now. This event and the fact that this many people want to come hear about this little thing I've been working on for so long is the highlight of my year. Thank you all for coming. Obviously, we wouldn't have had 4 of these if we didn't get people coming back interested. So this is really cool, and many thanks to George for making this happen.
Yeah, thank you, and George.
It's not me personally. So I think it's my time to thank you for attending, because without the main event, DITA-OT day would be, right? So thank you, and thank you for attending, because without you, again, there will be no DITA-OT day. We'll just meet in a living room or kitchen or somewhere. So thanks again, and that was it for this year. Thank you.